So then the rest of that phrase basically is he does these harmonics. He's actually hitting this, which is the 12th fret with his finger muting the string somewhere around the 14th fret or so. And he does that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think 8 times. And then he starts hitting harmonics on the 12th fret, the 7th fret, and then the 5th fret. And then he pulls the bar up. He does the wham bar. He has his tremolo set up to go up a step and a half. Yeah, a step and a half. Mine only goes up a whole step. A little more than a whole step. Yeah, mine is just shy of a minor third. So anyway, so he plays that. Now, those notes, that first note, again, this is over C minor, so that first note is a G note, and that's the 5th of C. Then that second note is a D note, and that's the 9th of C. And then this last note is another octave of G, G. So that's, again, the 5th. So I'm just breaking this down so you know why those harmonics sound so good over that chord. They're basically a 5th and a 9th, which work perfect over that chord. So then he just walks up scale notes out of the Dorian scale after the harmonics. And he goes into that double stop. So over the C chord, those first 4 notes are just C Dorian, and that's the 5th fret of the G string, 3rd fret of the B string, 4th fret of the B string, and then 6th fret of the B string. So that's. Then it goes to the A flat 7 chord, which is, then he plays the 7th fret of the B string to this double stop of barring the 4th fret on the B and the E string and hammering on the 6th fret of the B string. So with your 3rd finger. So that whole walk-up is. Now the way I look at this is that transition from C Dorian to the next note, that's a flat 7 over B. Over A flat. Then he goes into this, which is basically your 6th. He's hammering on from the 5th to the major 6th, and then you have your root note. This right here reminds me basically of over this dominant chord playing A major pentatonic. So I don't know if that's what he was thinking, but those notes kind of suggest that. Then it goes to a G chord. So again, it's that transition from A dominant 7 to the 5, which is the G7 chord, G altered. And there he goes from... Oh, I'm sorry. Before he does that, when he hammers this on, he pulls off that 6th fret to the 4th fret on the B string. So that whole thing is... Then he goes to these 2 notes, which is the 3rd fret on the B string, skip the G string, go to the D string, and play the 4th fret. And what that is over G7 is basically you have your 5th on the 3rd fret of the B string, and you have your major 7 of G on the 4th fret of the D string. And that gives you kind of an out sound, because if you're playing a dominant chord, you have a minor 7, but he's playing a major 7 over it, which gives you that kind of altered sound. But it works well because then he goes into this part of the lick, which is pulling off from the 4th fret to the 3rd fret on the D string, and then playing the 6th fret of the A string, which is basically that major 7 pulling off to the minor 7, or the dominant 7, to the minor 6 note, or in an altered chord, you could think of that as a sharp 5. So it's, the whole thing goes. Then it does that again, but it resolves down to the C note, and that second time he does it, it's actually when the C chord, it's after, back to the C, which that part is just basically your flat 5 to your 4 to your minor 3rd to your root. So that's, again, 4 to 3 pull off, to the 6 on the A string, to the 3rd fret on the A string. So that's. Now, before we get into the next part, let me just talk about, again, Scott does a lot of things with the whammy bar. That's kind of why he holds it in his hand the whole time, because he gets a lot of cool bends and vibratos and pre-bends. And in this, he does that a few times. So when he walks up, he's getting vibrato with that. And then when he pulls off, but he pulls the bar up sharply real quick too. So it's, so you hear that note get there. And then when he plays that note, he kind of does a pre-bend on the 3rd fret. But it's really quick, so. And then he has some vibrato on that note there. And he cuts that off pretty quickly. So, I'm sorry. And that's kind of, again, he cuts that off pretty quickly too. And he does a pre-bend on that first note. The second time he does it, he starts with a pre-bend too. Then when he lands on that note, he holds that a little bit before he goes into this diminished phrase. Now, that phrase there is just, it's a typical thing to do with the diminished scale, which is run up a major triad, go up a flat 5th, and do it again, and then do it again a flat 5th, and again a flat 5th. You keep going. And what that produces, it produces basically 2 major triads, and then you end up doing it in an octave. So the first one is your 2nd finger on the 2nd fret of the A string, then your 1st finger, the 1st fret of the D string, and your 4th finger, I'm sorry, on the 4th fret of the D string. So that's, and that's just a B major triad, your root, 3rd, and 5th. Then you move that up a half step and down 1 string. So that's up a flat 5, basically. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, flat 5. So, and you play that same shape again. So it's your 2nd finger on the 3rd fret of the D string, 1st finger on the, 2nd finger on the 3rd fret of the D string, 1st finger on the 2nd fret of the G string, and pinky on the 5th fret of the G string. So that's, so those 2 together sound like. Then you do that same pattern, which it's root, major, 3rd, and 5th, but that kind of shifts because the way the guitar is tuned. So instead of doing this same shape with the 2nd finger, then 1st finger, 4th finger on the next string, you have to do your 1st finger on the 4th fret of the G string, roll it over to the 4th fret of the B string, and then your pinky plays the 7th fret of the B string. So those three together go. Now you go back to that first shape with your second finger on the 6th fret of the B string, first finger on the A note, the 5th fret of the E string, and then you play your sinky. That's awesome. Then you play your pinky on the 8th fret of the of the E string. I always say stupid things. The sinky. I like my sinky. All right. And that's that whole pattern. And again, what he does with the bar, he kind of dips that first note. So he does a pre-bend. Now, what this actually is coming from, this scale, it's basically coming from it's triads up in flat 5s, right? And then it creates, it comes from a diminished scale, which is you have two different diminished scales. You have a whole half diminished scale, and you have a half whole diminished scale, which a half whole is basically, it starts with a half step. So you start with the C note, go up a half step, then a whole step, then a half step, then a whole step, then a half step. Well, this one comes out of the whole half diminished, which is basically C note, you go up a whole step first, then a half step, then a whole step, then a half step. So if you played these notes basically, starting from that B note on the A string, you'd have... Okay? And that's your C whole half diminished scale. And that's where, if you notice, this B note is the first note that I played. You go up a half step, then you go up a whole step, then a half step, whole step, half step, and that arpeggio comes right out. And that next arpeggio comes from... And then it just goes up in octaves. So that whole thing sounds like... Now, again, that's a B flat, or a B major arpeggio, root 3rd and 5th, to an F major arpeggio, root 3rd and 5th, then B major, back to F major. And then he goes up from that 8th fret on the E string to the 9th to the 10th fret. So it's... And he does a pre-bend there too, and he gradually pulls it up to that C note. So it's... And then he goes down what's essentially a pentatonic scale. But what's happening here is this note here is more or less a passing tone. So you're on that C note, and then it goes to the D note, which is the 9th of the chord, and that note in between is really just a passing tone. Then he goes down basically from that 10th fret of the E string, and he pulls off on all these strings. So it's the 10th fret to the 8th fret of the E string, to the 11th fret to the 8th fret of the B string, to the 10th fret to the 8th fret of the G string, to the 10th fret of the D string, back up to the 10th fret of the G string. And that's where he kind of... He pulls that bar up a little and then down. He dives down like a whole step. And then he stops the note. So it's... and that's basically, if you look at that, that's your pentatonic scale. C minor pentatonic, starting with the 9th though. So, okay, And then he goes into, after that, he goes... And what that is, he's sliding from that 9th up to the 4th, which is the 10th fret to the 13th fret on the E string, back down to the 10th fret. So, and now he just goes 10-8, 10-8, 10-8, 10-8 on the E, B, G, and D string. So it's... Then he hammers on that the 9th fret of the D string. So that whole phrase is and there, when he slides back down to that 10th fret, he pulls up again. So it's, but he doesn't do that kind of Jeff Beck let go of the bar. It's very much just pulled up, pulled down, and then goes down, back down those scales. And he dives down that again, kind of a half step when he gets to that 9th fret. And what you could think of that there, that's very country. Very reminiscent of Carl's country, that there. That is basically, again, going down that pentatonic scale, but that second note, or the first note on the second string, instead of playing this flat 7, he's playing the 6. And we've talked about that version of the pentatonic scale. So it's just has the 9th, the root, the 6th to the 5th, and then this is just your standard pentatonic. So...